I've never told this story before because, even now, it sounds too absurd to be real. If someone else had posted it here, I'd probably roll my eyes and assume they were making it up for internet points. But it happened. Years ago, I committed a crime that started with something so ordinary it could have happened to anyone: a small brown package left outside my apartment door. No return address. No shipping label I recognized. Just my name, handwritten in black marker. I spent days trying to figure out who had sent it. I asked neighbors. I checked with the building manager. Even the local courier companies had no record of a delivery. It was as if the box had simply appeared. Opening it turned out to be the biggest mistake and the beginning of the biggest crime I ever committed. At the time, I wasn't exactly living an honest life. I wasn't a career criminal yet, but I was desperate. Gambling debts had piled up, collection calls came daily, and every knock on my door made my stomach tighten. I kept telling myself I just needed one lucky break. That mysterious package looked exactly like one. I had no idea that by the end of it, I would cross a line I could never uncross. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't when I opened the box. It was when I decided to keep what was inside instead of calling the police. I left the package untouched for almost a full day. It sat on my kitchen table while I circled around it every few hours, convincing myself I should throw it away or hand it over to the police. Instead, I kept staring at it, wondering who knew my name, my address, and why they had gone to such lengths to stay anonymous. Eventually, curiosity won. Inside was a smaller metal case, a folded note, and something wrapped so carefully it looked valuable. The note was only one sentence long. You already know what to do. That was it. No signature. No explanation. The message made no sense, but it also felt strangely personal. I kept asking myself whether someone had mistaken me for another William or whether someone actually knew about my financial problems. For the next several hours, I convinced myself the package had to be some kind of mistake. But instead of reporting it, I hid it in my apartment. Looking back, that decision wasn't just dishonest. It was the first moment I knowingly stepped onto a path I couldn't easily leave. Every excuse I made after that grew from this single choice. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the hallway made me think someone had come back for the package. I kept imagining a stranger knocking on my door and saying there had been a terrible mistake. Part of me hoped that would happen because it would force me to give everything back without making a decision. Morning came, and no one showed up. Instead of doing the obvious thing, I started building excuses in my head. Maybe the sender had abandoned it on purpose. Maybe whoever owned it had no intention of claiming it. Maybe fate had finally decided to throw me a lifeline after months of feeling cornered by debt and bad decisions. The more I repeated those thoughts, the more reasonable they sounded. I wasn't thinking like an honest person anymore, I was thinking like someone trying to justify crossing a line. That frightened me more than the package itself. Looking back now, I realize the real crime didn't begin with what I eventually did. It began when I stopped asking what the right thing was and started asking what I could get away with. That shift in thinking changed me long before anyone else noticed. By the third day, the silence around the package felt almost deliberate. No calls, no letters, no one asking questions. It was as if whoever had left it expected me to make the next move on my own. I wish I could say I resisted. Instead, I convinced myself that keeping it wasn't really stealing. If nobody claimed it, then who was I hurting? That's the lie I kept repeating because it was easier than admitting I was acting out of greed and desperation. I made sure no friends came over that week. I stopped mentioning the package to anyone, even casually. The less other people knew, the less they could ask later if something went wrong. It wasn't some elaborate scheme, just a series of quiet decisions that isolated me from everyone around me. What unsettled me most wasn't fear of getting caught. It was how quickly secrecy became normal. Every small compromise made the next one easier. I still believed I was in control. I had no idea that someone else had been watching the situation unfold from the very beginning, and that the anonymous package was only the opening move in a much larger game. A week passed before anything happened. By then, I'd almost convinced myself the mystery was over. The package stayed hidden, and I tried to return to my normal routine, but normal no longer existed. Every unfamiliar face on the street caught my attention. Every unexpected sound outside my apartment made me freeze for a second longer than it should have. Then my phone rang. The number was blocked. I answered without thinking. The voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly. "I see you decided to keep it." I couldn't say a word. The caller didn't threaten me. They didn't ask for money or even tell me their name. They simply said, "You have 24 hours to make the right choice," before hanging up. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for it to light up again. It never did. That call changed everything. Until then, I'd been telling myself the package had been forgotten. Now I knew someone had been paying attention the entire time. For the first time since it appeared at my door, I wasn't thinking about what I might gain anymore. I was wondering who already knew exactly what I'd done. I spent the rest of that day replaying the call in my head. The voice wasn't angry, rushed, or emotional. That was the part that bothered me most. Whoever it was sounded completely certain that I'd understand the message. They spoke as if they already knew exactly how I'd respond. I considered taking the package to the police, but every scenario ended with uncomfortable questions. Why had I waited so long? Why hadn't I reported it immediately? The longer I delayed, the worse my explanation sounded, even to myself. For hours I paced my apartment, picking up the package, setting it back down, then doing the same thing again. I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized the exhausted man staring back. My life had become centered around a box that shouldn't have been in my possession in the first place. As midnight approached, I realized something unsettling. The anonymous caller hadn't told me what the right choice actually was. They were leaving that decision to me. And somehow, that made the responsibility feel even heavier than any direct threat could have. Morning came, and with it, a decision I still regret. I took the package out of its hiding place, convinced that if I understood why someone wanted it so badly, I'd finally know what to do. Instead, I became even more entangled. What I found made it obvious that the package had never been intended for me, or perhaps it had, but only as part of someone else's plan. That should have been the moment I walked away. Instead, I kept the contents. I told myself I wasn't stealing because I hadn't taken them from a person directly. I wasn't thinking about ownership anymore, I was thinking about opportunity. That's a dangerous way to think. Once you start treating every moral decision like a calculation of risk instead of right and wrong, you've already crossed a line. The real crime wasn't just keeping something that wasn't mine. It was the deliberate choice to profit from a situation I knew was wrong. I acted because I believed I could escape the consequences. For a brief moment, I even felt relieved. That feeling didn't last. It was replaced by the creeping certainty that someone else had expected me to make exactly that choice. For 2 days, nothing happened. That was almost worse than an immediate confrontation. The silence gave my imagination room to grow. I started noticing the same gray sedan parked across the street more than once. A man in a dark jacket seemed to appear wherever I went, at the grocery store, outside the cafe where I usually grabbed coffee, even near my apartment building. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. Then my landlord stopped me in the hallway. He casually mentioned that someone had come by asking whether I still lived there. He couldn't describe the visitor beyond well-dressed and polite, but that was enough to make my pulse race. I forced a laugh and pretended it was probably an old acquaintance. It was a terrible performance. From that moment on, every ordinary conversation felt loaded with hidden meaning. I wasn't just hiding a secret anymore, I was carrying it everywhere I went. The weight of it seeped into every interaction, and I realized I had become suspicious of everyone, including myself. By then, paranoia had become part of my daily routine. I'd leave my apartment, walk half a block, then turn around just to see if anyone was behind me. I'd catch myself studying strangers' faces, wondering whether they recognized me or knew something I didn't. Living that way is exhausting. You stop trusting your instincts because every harmless coincidence starts feeling like evidence. One evening, I returned home to find my apartment exactly as I'd left it, except for one tiny detail. The package wasn't where I'd hidden it. For a split second, I thought someone had broken in. I searched every room, every drawer, every shelf. Then I found it sitting neatly on my kitchen table. I know I hadn't left it there. Nothing else was missing. No locks were damaged. No windows were open. Whoever had entered, if anyone had, wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wished. That realization hit harder than any threat could have. I wasn't just afraid of being caught anymore. I was afraid of someone who seemed to be playing with my fear, patiently waiting for me to make one more mistake. I finally accepted that I couldn't keep pretending everything was under control. Whether someone had actually entered my apartment or my own frayed nerves were betraying me, the effect was the same. I was terrified. I packed the contents of the package into a backpack, intending to get rid of them for good. I walked for nearly an hour, changing direction every few blocks, convinced that someone was following me. Every passing car sounded too slow. Every stranger who glanced in my direction felt like they knew exactly what I was carrying. Then my phone buzzed. One message. Too late. No number. No name. Just those two words. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, unable to move. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. In that moment, I understood something I had been refusing to admit. Whatever this was, it had stopped being about the package days ago. It was about me. The choice to keep something that wasn't mine had changed the way I saw the world. Every shadow looked threatening because I knew my own conscience had become my worst pursuer. Even if no one else was hunting me, I couldn't outrun the person I'd become. I barely made it back to my apartment that night. I hadn't thrown anything away. The backpack was still slung over my shoulder, feeling heavier with every step, even though it weighed almost nothing. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark, waiting for something. A phone call. Another message. Anything. Instead, there was a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I looked through the peephole. No one. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty except for a plain white envelope lying on the floor. There was no stamp, no address, no indication of who had left it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence. Some debts are never paid with money. That was enough to break whatever confidence I had left. The next morning, I learned that the police had been asking neighbors whether anyone had seen unusual deliveries in the building. They never came to my door that day, but hearing those questions was enough. I realized I had spent so much energy avoiding responsibility that I'd become trapped by my own fear. Whether the investigation had anything to do with me or not no longer mattered. My conscience had already put me on trial. The police never arrested me. At least, not for that. Eventually, the questions around the neighborhood stopped, the strange messages ended, and the anonymous phone calls never came back. Life on the outside returned to something that looked normal. I went back to work, paid my bills, and even laughed with friends from time to time. Anyone watching would have assumed the whole ordeal had passed. They would have been wrong. The real punishment wasn't a courtroom or a prison cell. It was what happened inside my own head. I started locking my door twice before bed. I checked the peephole whenever someone walked down the hallway. Every unexpected package, every unknown number on my phone, every knock after dark sent a wave of panic through me. That's the part people rarely talk about. You can escape legal consequences and still never feel free again. Whatever I gained from that decision disappeared quickly. What stayed behind was suspicion, regret, and the constant awareness that one selfish choice had rewritten the way I experienced ordinary life. In the end, I became the person I feared most. A man who could no longer trust himself. People sometimes ask whether I regret what I did. The honest answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. Of course, I regret the decision itself, but what haunts me even more is how easily I became the kind of person who could justify it. Before all this happened, I liked to believe that everyone had a line they would never cross. I certainly believed I had one. It turns out those lines can move when you're desperate, scared, or convinced that nobody will ever know. That's the lie I told myself. The package didn't magically transform me into a criminal. It exposed parts of my character I had ignored for years: my greed, my pride, and my willingness to choose the easier path when life became difficult. Admitting that has been far more painful than admitting the crime itself. I still think about the anonymous sender. I don't know who they were or why they chose me. Maybe I was just unlucky. Maybe I was selected because someone believed I'd failed a test. Looking back, I can't say they were wrong. I failed at the moment I chose temptation over integrity. The only reason I'm writing this now is because enough time has passed for me to stop hiding behind excuses. For years, I told myself I had been unlucky, manipulated, or trapped by circumstances. There was some truth in those thoughts, but they were never the whole truth. The final decision was always mine. I've replayed that week in my head countless times, searching for the exact moment I could have changed the outcome. There wasn't just one. There were dozens. I could have reported the package immediately. I could have admitted my mistake after opening it. I could have stopped every time my conscience warned me I was heading in the wrong direction. Instead, I kept choosing silence. If you've read this far hoping for a clever trick or a perfect crime, you're going to be disappointed. There wasn't one. What looked like a shortcut out of my problems became years of anxiety and regret. If life ever hands you a mysterious opportunity that feels too convenient, don't ask yourself what you might gain. Ask yourself what you'll become if you take it. That's the question I wish I'd answered before it was too late. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that most life-changing mistakes don't begin with some dramatic, movie-like moment. They begin with a small decision that feels harmless. You tell yourself it's temporary. You convince yourself you'll fix everything tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week, and before you realize it, you've built an entire life around a lie. I don't know who sent that package. I never found out why my name was on it or whether I was the intended recipient. Maybe I'll never know. Oddly enough, those unanswered questions don't bother me as much anymore. The one question that still matters is why I ignored the voice in my head telling me to do the right thing. I'm not writing this to ask for sympathy. I made my choices, and I've lived with the consequences ever since. If my story serves any purpose, I hope it's this: don't mistake desperation for permission. Hard times can explain bad decisions, but they never erase responsibility. If you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads between honesty and convenience, choose honesty. It may cost you something in the moment, but it's far cheaper than spending years haunted by the person you became.